All right, well, our next guest today is Jack Mendoza Wilson. He's a British-Ukrainian. He's from the British-Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. Sir, thanks very much for taking the time today. All right, so the EU has extended the trade liberalization. The compromise that it reached earlier, it's just extended it. What compromise is this, and how does it affect what the farmers are expecting?
Well, I think, firstly, when you look at the outcome from the agreement, it shows the power of European farmers, both politically and economically. Ukraine had been seeking an extension to the current agreement with no hardening of terms. But what we see in the agreement reached late last night is that, in fact, the terms are much harder. And as a consequence, it's likely that Ukraine will lose approximately 330 million euros of income, much needed income, as a result of the toughening of terms of trade that have been introduced by the Council of Ministers' decision last night.
All right, but is there any way for Ukraine perhaps to be able to export the products that it is currently exporting to Europe somewhere else?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, we're in this position because of the Russian war, which immediately limited Ukraine's ability to be able to export through its traditional Black Sea routes to its global customers. So with that avenue blocked off, exports started going through Europe, and there was leakage of those exports, which undermined, or Polish farmers or Austrian farmers or Romanian farmers would say, undermined prices in their countries. And so they asked for these tariffs to be introduced. What Ukraine can do, and is doing, is increasing the amount of export through the Black Sea of products like grain, which we see in front of us now. And that's really a result of good military action by Ukraine in neutralizing the threat of the Russian Black Sea fleet. So, in fact, I looked at the trade figures through the Black Sea before coming on this morning, and what we see is that of 17 million tons of agricultural exports from Ukraine since the start of the year, approximately 15 million of the tons have gone through the Black Sea corridor, and only 2 million across the border to Poland. So Ukraine is diversifying already back to its traditional markets of the south. So that gives hope both for Ukraine and, I think, for Polish farmers.
Right, and now coming back to perhaps now the deep and comprehensive free trade area that is now the topic of a discussion that we see now in the European hemisphere. And we know that both Ukraine and EU share a robust trade relationship. And now the DCFTA have brought vast benefits to Ukraine. But if you could perhaps elaborate a bit more what they are truly.
I think that's a great question, because actually what we see with the disputes that we've seen since April 2023 on the border between Ukraine and Poland and other European countries is really what we need to deal with, what the EU needs to deal with in working on Ukraine's accession. Ukraine's a huge agricultural producer, very efficient, some of the best black soil in the world. And eventually, as Ukraine heads towards European membership, Ukraine needs to be fully integrated into the EU agricultural system. And that's going to come with a number of shocks and concerns for farmers in countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and France, who so far have had their market defended against this competition which will come in. So what we're really seeing through this dispute at the moment is the opening salvos of a long-term discussion over how the European Union absorbs the Ukrainian agricultural sector into the common agricultural policy of the EU. So I think we have further tough conversations to come over that process of Ukrainian EU accession.
That's right. So in a way, one could say that we're already, the farmers in the older Europe are experiencing the growing pains of accession of countries like Ukraine. And like you said, countries like Ukraine that have vast amounts of arable soil, and a lot of farming will move there.
I think that's the case, and I think that what we see now is, I imagined that this type of issue would be brought up later in the EU accession process, but the political protests of farmers in Poland and in Hungary and elsewhere have really brought this to the front now, and it's an issue that has to be dealt with. Agriculture is the largest single area of EU expenditure. There are significant subsidies and market protections for European farmers. Now, Ukraine is going to enter into that space, and there will have to be deep negotiations on what is fair, because that's what's important. It's not that Ukraine wins or Poland wins or the EU wins. Ukraine will be part of the European single marketplace for agricultural products. It will have to slowly absorb itself into that marketplace, and there needs to be mechanisms found to do so.
And like you mentioned, what I gather from what you're saying is that it also creates a sense of certainty and transparency between the countries, and reducing also business risks for investors and traders now between Ukraine and the EU itself. Now, perhaps let's look at it from another perspective. And what do you think? What challenges have been brought during the implementation now of the DCFTA?
I think what we're seeing, the first area of harmonization is in the relaxation of tariffs and quotas. So you move towards a free trade of goods between the EU and Ukraine. The second aspect, which is equally important, and most European countries who've joined the EU are familiar with it, is the harmonization of terms, sanitary, and so on, in terms of the import and export, particularly of agricultural products. So Ukraine has a long distance to go in some cases to be able to increase its standards in terms of agriculture and agricultural food production to match those of the European Union. And that process has been ongoing since Ukraine signed the DCFTA, but now we're in the point where we're moving with Ukraine's accession to the EU in the future of absolutely adopting all of the standards that are in the EU acquis. So Ukraine has a long road to travel in doing so, and that's going to require investment. And investment is difficult in this current conflict environment, although because Ukraine's agriculture is so strong, we are still seeing inward-bound agricultural investment into the Ukrainian market to prepare Ukrainian business for the future when it can join the EU.
All right, and just a final question. Obviously, the UK being part of the Euro piece, but now being a separate piece, how does the UK fit in to these new systems?
I'm one of those who'd rather we were still in the European Union, but nonetheless, the reality is we're not. Ukraine in 2020 signed a deep partnership agreement with Ukraine, and that was then renewed with Rishi Sunak's visit to Ukraine in February this year. So the UK and Ukraine have a robust trading arrangement in place, which actually echoes initially the European Union tariffs and limits and quotas to maintain trade between the European Union and Ukraine and the United Kingdom, and that has been deepened by the recent agreement. So UK sees Ukraine as a crucial component in the future of its trade partnership, not only in agricultural products, but also in technology, in energy, in creative products, and more recently, of course, in the defense sector.
All right, so the UK also making adjustments, looking towards a future that has Ukraine in the European Union.
As it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the UK, somewhat ironically, at the same time as it was leaving, was also fully supportive of Ukraine's desire to join the European Union, because it recognizes that creates a stronger European Union marketplace. And despite us no longer being a member of the European Union, the EU is absolutely the most important export marketplace for the United Kingdom. So we want a strong EU, and we want to be able to trade on good terms with a strong and vibrant EU marketplace.
All right, that was Jock Mendoza Wilson from the British-Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. Sir, thanks very much. Pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.